She was 9 months pregnant, bleeding, and begging for help. The nurse looked her up and down, saw the cheap slippers and the faded wrapper, and said the beds were only for people who could pay. But that nurse had no idea the quiet woman she was throwing out was the wife of the very man whose name was painted on the front of that hospital. If you love emotional stories filled with betrayal, cruelty, shocking secrets, and sweet, well-earned justice, then you are in exactly the right place. So go ahead, sit back, grab something cold to drink, and stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens in that waiting room will leave your mouth hanging open. Before we begin, comment which country you're watching from and your local time right now. Now, let's step into the story. The morning Gonse Okafor's world tilted began like any other in the quiet green streets of Gra Enugu. Sunlight slid across the polished floors of the big house, and somewhere in the back the cook was frying plantain, the smell drifting through the open windows. Gonse stood at the bedroom mirror in a plain blue wrapper and a faded headscarf, one hand resting on the wide curve of her belly, the other smoothing a crease she could no longer reach. She was 28 years old, and in 9 months of marriage she had learned that wealth, when it arrived, was a strange and slippery thing. People who met her never guessed what her life had become. She still bought her own tomatoes at Ogbete Market, still greeted the gateman by his children's names, still pressed folded naira into the palms of the old women who sold groundnuts by the roadside. Her mother had raised her in a 2-room flat in Abakaliki, and her mother's favorite saying had become Gonse's own quiet creed. A person's worth, the old woman used to say, is not stitched into their clothes. Gonse believed it the way other people believed in air. The man she had married believed it too, though the world treated him very differently. Dr. Chukwuemeka Okafor, whom everyone called Emeka, was a tall, soft-spoken surgeon with gray just beginning at his temples, and a reputation that walked into rooms before he did. 2 weeks earlier, he had been named Chief Medical Director of Greater Grace Teaching Hospital, the largest hospital in the city, a sprawling complex of white buildings and humming generators where thousands of lives passed through every month. His name was already on the gleaming sign at the gate. His photograph hung in the lobby. And yet in those 2 short weeks, almost none of the hundreds of staff had ever laid eyes on his wife. That was no accident. Emeka had wanted to start without ceremony, to watch how the hospital truly ran before anyone learned to perform for him. And Gonse, for her part, had never once in her life wanted to be announced. She had attended his swearing-in from the back row in a simple dress, slipping out before the photographers found her. To the people of Greater Grace, the director's wife was a rumor, a name, a blank space waiting to be filled. This is the thing you must hold in your heart as the story turns, because the woman about to walk through those hospital doors carried a secret heavier than her own pregnancy. She was not a poor stranger. She was the wife of the most powerful man in that building, and not a single soul on duty that day had any idea. The first pain came just after 10 in the morning, low and deep, like a fist closing somewhere it had no business being. Gonse breathed through it the way the antenatal classes had taught her, counting, waiting. She was not due for 3 more weeks. The baby, a boy they had already begun to call by a name they kept between themselves, had been kicking strong all week. There was no reason to worry. She told herself this twice. Then she sat down at the dining table to drink her tea, and when she stood again she felt the warm, unmistakable wetness, and she looked down and saw the bright bloom of red against the blue of her wrapper, and the worry that she had been so calmly pushing away rushed back all at once and stole her breath. For a moment she simply stood very still, one hand flat on the table. Bleeding was not labor. Bleeding this late, this sudden, was something else, something the doctors had words for that she did not want to remember. She reached for her phone and called Emeka. It rang and went to the recorded voice telling her to leave a message. He was in the board meeting that had been circled on the calendar for a month, the long quarterly review where phones were collected at the door. She called again, the same recorded voice. "Madam." The cook had appeared in the doorway, alarmed by something in the air. "Madam, you are bleeding." "Get Mr. Sunday," Gonse said, and was proud that her voice did not shake. "Tell him to bring the car, now." She did not change her clothes. There was no time, and besides, she thought, what did clothes matter when blood was the thing on the floor? She wrapped a clean cloth around herself, picked up nothing but her phone and a little purse, and went down the stairs slower than she had ever gone down, them holding the rail with both hands. Mr. Sunday, the family driver, a calm older man who had served the household for years, took one look at her face and turned white. "Madame, should I call Olga? Should I call the doctor? He is in the meeting. They will not reach him. Just drive." She paused at the open door of the car, breathing through another tightening wave. "The nearest hospital Sunday. Whatever is closest. Hurry." The nearest hospital. Sunday's hands knew the way before his mind did, because the nearest hospital, the one barely 10 minutes through the morning traffic, was the very one whose sign now carried her husband's name. He did not say this. He only pulled the car out through the gate and pressed the accelerator, weaving past a danfo loaded with passengers, past women balancing trays on their heads, past the ordinary, unbothered morning of a city that did not know or care that a woman in the back seat was gripping the door handle and praying with her eyes shut. Gonse pressed her phone to her chest and tried Emeka one more time just to hear it ring. She thought, if I can only get there, if I can only get someone to look at me, everything will be fine. She did not know the building she was rushing toward. She did not know its waiting hall or its rules, or the woman in the white uniform who would be standing behind the desk when she arrived. She knew only the pain and the blood and the small fierce life inside her that she would have crawled across broken glass to protect. The car turned the last corner. The white buildings rose up ahead. And Gonse Okafor, the director's wife that no one had ever seen, leaned forward and whispered to herself that it was a hospital, and hospitals were where you went to be saved. The car had barely stopped before Gonse pushed the door open herself. Mr. Sunday hurried around to take her arm, but she was already moving toward the wide glass entrance of Greater Grace Teaching Hospital. One hand braced beneath her belly, the bloodstain on her wrapper darkening with every step. The automatic doors slid apart and let out a wall of cool air and the particular smell of every hospital in the world, antiseptic and floor wax, and something underneath it that no amount of cleaning ever quite removed. The emergency reception was a long hall lined with metal chairs, most of them filled. A child cried somewhere. An old man coughed into his fist. A television bolted high on the wall played a church service with the sound turned almost off. And at the center of it all stood a tall counter, and behind that counter sat a woman whose name tag read Nurse Patience Okiki Senior Nurse, and whose entire bearing announced that this hall was her kingdom, and these people her unwelcome subjects. Nurse Patience was a handsome woman in her early 40s. Her uniform crisply pressed her wig, styled her acrylic nails clicking against the desk as she scrolled through her phone. She had perfected over many years the art of looking at a person and pricing them in a single glance the way a trader prices a yam. She saw the cheap rubber slippers first, then the faded wrapper, then the plain scarf and the absence of jewelry. And by the time her eyes reached Gonse's frightened face, she had already decided exactly how much this woman was worth, which, in her calculation, was almost nothing. "Please," Gonse said, gripping the edge of the counter. "Please, I am bleeding. I am pregnant, and I am bleeding. I need a doctor." Patience did not look up from her phone right away. She finished whatever she was reading, let a slow second pass to make the point of who was in charge, and only then raised her eyes. "Madam, you have to register," she said. "Sit down and wait for your turn like everybody else. You don't understand." Gonse's voice cracked despite herself. "This is not normal bleeding. It started this morning and it is heavy. The baby is not due yet. Something is wrong. Please, just let someone look at me." A flicker of irritation crossed Patience's face, the irritation of a person interrupted. She set her phone down, leaned back in her chair and folded her arms, and her eyes traveled once more slowly and openly down the length of Gonce's body and back up again. "Do you have a hospital card?" "No, I have never been here. I came because it was the closest." "Then you have to open a file. There is a fee for opening a file and there is a deposit for emergency admission." She said the word deposit the way some people say a secret password. "How much money did you come with?" Gonce blinked at her. "I came with what was in my purse. I rushed out. My husband is—" She stopped herself. She had nearly said it, nearly thrown the name down on that counter like a winning card, and something in her, some stubborn corner of the woman her mother had raised, refused. She did not want to be saved because of who her husband was. She wanted to be saved because she was a human being standing in a hospital asking for help. Surely that was enough. Surely that was the whole point of a hospital. "My husband will pay," she finished quietly. "Whatever it costs, he will pay. I only need to be seen now, please. I am frightened." Patience exhaled through her nose a small contemptuous sound and picked her phone back up. "That is what all of them say." She did not bother to lower her voice, and a few heads turned along the row of metal chairs. "Everybody's husband will pay. Everybody is somebody's wife. Then we admit them, we use our materials, and the husband is nowhere to be found. This is a hospital, madam, not your father's house. We have rules." "I am not asking for charity," Gonce said. "I am asking for a doctor. There is blood. Please look at me." For one moment, something almost human moved behind the nurse's eyes. Some old training, some memory of why she'd become a nurse in the first place, buried so deep now that it surfaced only as a faint discomfort. But it passed. She had seen 1,000 desperate faces, and she had learned to feel nothing. And feeling nothing had become to her a kind of strength. "Sit down," she said, pointing one long nail toward the far end of the crowded row. "There. When you have your registration done and your deposit ready, somebody will attend to you. Until then, you are blocking my counter. Next person." A man behind Gonce shuffled forward with his card already out, the card of someone who knew how the building worked, and Patience's whole manner changed in an instant, brightening into a brisk, professional warmth as she greeted him. Gonce stood frozen for a heartbeat. The words "sit down" ringing in her ears, unable to believe that this was happening, that she'd walked into a place built to save lives and been told to sit in a corner and bleed. Another pain rolled through her, sharper than before, and she had to bend forward and brace both hands on her knees to keep from crying out. Mr. Sunday, hovering at the door, started toward her, but a security guard waved him back, and the old driver could only stand there, twisting his cap in his hands, helpless. When the wave passed, Gonce straightened, breathing hard, and looked at the long row of metal chairs, and at the church service flickering silently on the television, and at the broad, indifferent back of Nurse Patience, who had already turned away to laugh at something on her phone as though the pregnant woman in front of her had simply ceased to exist. Slowly holding her belly, Gonce made her way to the far chair and lowered herself down. She told herself it would be only a few minutes. She told herself someone kind would come. She did not yet know how long she would sit there, or how much worse it would get before anyone in that uniform would look at her as if she mattered at all. The clock on the far wall of the waiting hall moved with a cruelty all its own. Gonce watched its red second hand sweep around once, twice, 10 times while the pain came and went in tightening waves, each one a little closer to the last. She kept one hand pressed against the underside of her belly, as if she could hold the baby in place by will alone, and with the other she kept lifting her phone, dialing Emeka, listening to it ring into silence. 20 minutes passed, then 30. No one came. Across the hall, behind the tall counter, the machinery of favoritism ran smoothly. Gonse, in her stillness, began to understand the system she had walked into. A man in a good shirt arrived, pressed something folded into Nurse Patience's hand below the level of the desk, and was waved through the inner doors within 2 minutes. A woman in expensive lace was greeted by name and personally escorted to a consulting room. But an old farmer with a bandaged hand, a young mother with a feverish toddler, a laborer holding his ribs, all of them sat where Gonse sat in the long row of the overlooked, waiting for a turn that never seemed to arrive. It was a young nurse who finally noticed her. She could not have been more than 23 slight, and quick with her hair pulled back beneath her cap, and a trainee's identification clipped to her pocket that read, Nurse Amaka. She had been carrying a tray of files past the row of chairs when she saw Gonse bend, double-gripping the armrests, her jaw clenched against a sound she would not let out. Amaka stopped. She looked at the dark stain spreading on the blue wrapper, and her young face changed. "Madam," she set the tray down on an empty chair and crouched in front of Gonse. "Madam, how long have you been bleeding? Has anyone taken your blood pressure?" "No one has looked at me," Gonse managed. "I've been here almost an hour. I told the nurse at the desk." She said to wait. Amaka's eyes went briefly to the counter, and something tightened in her face, a fear that Gonse did not yet understand. But the young nurse turned back, took Gonse's wrist and pressed 2 fingers to it, counting her lips moving. Then she laid a gentle hand on the side of the swollen belly and went very still, the way a person goes still when the news under their hand is not good. "Your pulse is too fast," Amaka said quietly, "and you are pale. Madam, this bleeding in late pregnancy, it can be serious. You need to be seen now, not later." She rose to her feet, decision in her shoulders. "Wait here. Let me speak to Sister Patience." She crossed to the counter, and Gonse watched the conversation she could not hear. She watched Amaka lean in urgent gesturing back toward the chairs. She watched Nurse Patience listen with the bored expression of a queen hearing a complaint beneath her notice. And then she watched Patience's face harden, watched her point one nail at the young nurse's chest, watched her say something short and sharp that made Amaka flinch. "She has not paid her deposit." Patience's voice rose now deliberately for the benefit of the whole hall. "Are you the one who will pay it? Did they send you to teach me how to run my own emergency ward? You are a trainee, Amaka. Your job is to carry files, not to decide who jumps the queue because they have given you a sad face." She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to wound. "These people know how to act. Tears blood. Oh, please. Oh, doctor. And the moment we treat them for free, they vanish. If you want to nurse beggars, go and open a roadside clinic. In this hospital, we follow the rules." Amaka stood there, her ears burning the eyes of the waiting hall on her back. She was young, she was a trainee, and she knew exactly how easily a senior nurse could end a career before it had begun, with one bad report, one quiet word in the right ear. The sensible thing, the safe thing, was to lower her eyes, say "yes, sister," and walk away. But she glanced back at the woman in the corner, at the blood, at the way Gonse's hand trembled where it rested on the chair, and the safe thing stuck in her throat. It was here that the bitter joke of the whole day first showed its face, though only the audience could see it. All over Greater Grace Teaching Hospital that morning, staff were on their best behavior, because word had spread that the new chief medical director was a hawk who might appear in any ward at any hour. In the pharmacy, attendants double-checked their records. On the surgical floor, a registrar who usually arrived late had come in before dawn. Even Nurse Patience, queen of her counter, had told Ronke twice that morning to keep the desk tidy. You never know when Olga director will pass. The whole building trembled in its small ways before the power of one man's name. And that man's wife sat bleeding in the corner of the emergency hall, turned away by the very fear of him, and not one of them knew it. Amaka made her choice. She did not argue further with Patience. She simply turned, picked up a paper cup, filled it with water from the cooler, and brought it to Gonse, kneeling again beside the chair. "Drink small," she whispered. "I'm going to try another way. I have a friend on the maternity floor, a midwife. Let me see if I can—" She never finished the sentence. Gonse had reached for the cup, and as her fingers closed around it, a pain unlike any of the others tore through her, a deep, wrenching pull that drove the breath from her body and turned the edges of the world to gray. The cup fell. Water spread across the floor. Gonse's eyes rolled. Her shoulders sagged and she pitched forward off the edge of the metal chair. Amaka caught her barely both arms around the heavy sliding weight of her screaming for help across the crowded hall, and for one terrible suspended moment, the whole room seemed to hold its breath as the director's wife went limp in a trainee's arms on the cold, tiled floor. For a moment that stretched far too long, Amakai knelt on the wet tiles with the full weight of the unconscious woman against her chest, shouting for help into a hall that only stared. "Sister Patience, she has fainted. She is bleeding. I need a stretcher, please." Nurse Patience rose from her chair with the unhurried air of a woman who had seen every kind of drama and believed in almost none of it. She came around the counter, looked down at Gonse slumped against the trainee, and clicked her tongue. "Fainting." She said it like an accusation. "They always faint when they want to be attended to free of charge. Sit her up properly, Amaka, you will hurt your back. Give her air, she will come around." She did not crouch. She did not check a pulse. She glanced at the spreading water and the smear of blood, and her lip curled at the mess on her clean floor. "And clean that up before somebody slips and we get sued. She needs a doctor now," Amaka insisted, her voice shaking with anger and fear. Her pulse was racing. "She is losing blood. This is not pretending." "Are you a doctor?" Patience snapped. "Then keep quiet." And it was at that exact moment, as if summoned to make the cruelty complete, that the glass doors slid open and Mrs. Bianca arrived. She did not walk in so much as make an entrance. She was a woman of perhaps 50, draped in a sweeping gown of imported lace that must have cost more than a junior nurse earned in 3 months, a great glittering necklace at her throat, oversized sunglasses pushed up into an elaborate wig, and a designer handbag that she carried the way a soldier carries a flag. Behind her trailed a thin girl she treated as a personal assistant, struggling under shopping bags. Mrs. Bianca's heels announced her across the tiles, and her voice arrived a half-second before she did. "Where's the senior nurse I called ahead? I am not going to sit in any queue, do you hear me? Bianca, they should have told you I am coming." The transformation in Nurse Patience was something to behold. The bored contempt fell away like a dropped mask, and in its place bloomed a wide, eager, fawning smile. She abandoned the collapsed woman on the floor as though she had never existed, and hurried forward, both hands clasped. "Ah, Madam Bianca. Welcome, welcome, Ma. Yes, they told us. You did not have to wait 1 second. Come this way. Let me find you somewhere comfortable to sit while we prepare your file. Comfortable." Mrs. Bianca's painted mouth turned down as her eyes swept the crowded hall. "These chairs, with all these people?" Her gaze landed on the nearest free seat, which happened to be the one beside the spot where Amaka still crouched, holding Gonse. She wrinkled her nose. "And who is this lying on the ground? Why is there blood on your floor? Is this a hospital or a butcher's market? It is nothing, but just somebody who came without. Means we are sorting it out." Patience turned, and here came the moment that would later play over and over in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. She bent down, took Gonse by the arm, and began to drag her half-conscious off the chair. "Get up, madam. Get up small. You are taking the good seat. Madam Bianca needs to sit." Amaka moved her down to the end down there, away from the entrance. Amaka stared at her, stunned. "Sister, she just fainted. You cannot move her like—" "I said move her." Patience's smile never reached Gonse. It stayed fixed on the wealthy woman like a lamp pointed in one direction. She hauled Gonse upright, ignoring the moan that escaped her, and steered her toward the far end of the row, depositing her on a hard bench near the toilets, where the smell was bad and no nurse ever looked. Then she swept a clean cloth over the vacated chair, plumped a cushion that had appeared from nowhere, and gestured Mrs. Bianca into it as though seating a queen. Gonse, surfacing now from the gray, found herself propped against a wall at the wrong end of the hall, the world spinning slowly back into focus. She understood dimly that she had been moved. She understood that the bleeding had not stopped, and she understood with a clarity that cut through the pain that she had been set aside like a soiled thing to make room for a woman in lace. Mrs. Bianca settled into her stolen chair and looked across the hall at the pale, sweating woman in the faded wrapper, and instead of pity, her face filled with disgust. Honestly. She said it loudly, fanning herself with a glossy magazine performing for the whole watching hall. Look at her, no shame. Coming to a place like this, dressed like that, bleeding on the chairs, expecting people to drop everything. In my hospital in Lagos, they would never allow such ones inside. This is why standards are falling. She turned to patients with a conspirator's smile. You people are too kind. If it were me, I would have sent her to the general hospital where her kind belong. Some of us came here to be among quality, not to share air with roadside women who cannot even afford a clean wrapper. A ripple went through the hall, the uncomfortable shifting of people who knew something was wrong, but were too poor, too tired, or too afraid to say it. The old farmer with the bandaged hand looked at the floor. The young mother held her toddler tighter. Amaka's hands had curled into fists at her sides, and Gonse Okafor, the wife of the man whose name hung over the door, lifted her head from the wall and met Mrs. Bianca's contemptuous stare. She did not weep. She did not beg. She simply looked at her with two clear, steady, sorrowful eyes, the eyes of a woman who had been raised to believe that worth was not stitched into clothes sitting in a hall full of people who believed the opposite. And she said nothing at all because she had begun to understand that nothing she said would matter here. What none of them could see was the thing the audience already knew. Every cruel word Mrs. Bianca spoke, every cushion patients plumped, every inch they pushed. This quiet woman down toward the bad end of the hall was being stored away by fate like ammunition in a chamber, and the trigger was already turning 10 minutes up the road where a board meeting was about to end. Amaka could not stay still any longer. She had taken an oath even as a trainee, even with her name still in pencil on the duty roster, and that oath did not have a line in it about deposits. So, while Nurse Patience busied herself fawning over Mrs. Bianca, fetching her chilled water in a glass when Patience drank from paper cups, the young trainee made a quiet decision that could cost her everything. She slipped behind the counter when Patience's back was turned, pulled a blank registration form from the tray, and filled it out herself in her small, careful handwriting. Name, she wrote, then stopped because she did not have it. She returned to the bad end of the hall and crouched by Gonse, who sat slumped against the wall gripping the bench through another tightening wave. "Madam, your name. Quick, before she sees me." "Gonse," she breathed. "Gonse Okafor." Amaka wrote it down without a flicker, the name meaning nothing to her. Just 2 more words on a form. She did not connect Okafor on her paper to Okafor on the sign at the gate. Why would she? Half of Enugu carried common surnames. She finished the form, marked it emergency antepartum hemorrhage, and pressed it flat against her thigh so it would not be seen. "I am going to take this to my friend on the maternity floor," she whispered. "Her name is Sister Nneka. She's a real midwife. She has been here 15 years and she does not play these games. If I can get her to come down or get you moved up, nobody can stop a midwife from attending a bleeding mother. Drink small, more water. Keep your hand here." She pressed Gonse's palm to the lowest curve of her belly. "Talk to him. Tell him to hold on. I'm coming back. I promise you. Something in the way she said it, with the fierce loyalty of the young who have not yet learned to be careful, brought tears to Gonse's eyes for the first time all morning. Not the pain, not the insults, but this, a stranger in a trainee's uniform, kneeling on a dirty floor and promising to come back. "Why are you helping me?" Gonse whispered. "When she will punish you for it." Amaka gave a small, crooked smile. "Because my own mother bled like this when she was carrying my brother, and a nurse turned her away, and my brother did not live." She blinked hard. "Nobody is turning you away today. Not while I am on this floor." And she was gone, the form pressed to her side, moving fast and low through the crowd toward the stairwell. While she climbed, the audience learned what Amaka already suspected, and the patients in that hall had long ago accepted as the way of things. Nurse Patience Okiki had run the emergency reception of Greater Grace for 9 years, and in those 9 years she had built a quiet, profitable little kingdom on the desperation of the poor. The folded notes pressed below the counter. The deposits that somehow grew larger for those who looked like they could be squeezed and shrank to nothing for those who could not. The way a bed could appear in an instant for the right handshake and vanish entirely for a farmer with a feverish child. She had a phrase she was famous for among the staff, 4 short words she used to end any plea from anyone too poor to matter. No money, no service. She said it the way other people said good morning, and she had never once been made to answer for it because the poor do not write complaints. And the management above her cared more about the monthly revenue than the people who could not raise it. It was a system that had worked for her for 9 long years. It had never met a day like this one. Up on the maternity floor, Amaka found Sister Naneka changing linens, and breathlessly told her everything: the bleeding, the fainting, the woman dragged to the bad end of the hall to give her seat to a socialite. The older midwife's face set into grim lines. Antepartum hemorrhage, and that woman left her on the floor. She dropped the linens. "Show me, now. We do not wait for any deposit when a baby is dying. I do not care whose counter it is." The 2 of them came down the stairs together, Neka leading, and the moment they reached the hall and Amaka pointed to the bench by the toilets where Gonse sat gray-faced and trembling, the trap they had not seen was already closing. Nurse Patience had turned from Mrs. Bianca's side at exactly the wrong second. She saw the trainee she had ordered to stand down crossing her hall with the senior midwife in tow. She saw the registration form in Amaka's hand, the form she had refused to open. And she understood at once that her authority, the one thing she guarded above money itself, was being gone around behind her back in front of a paying client, in front of the whole waiting room. Amaka. The single word cracked across the hall like a whip. Sister Naneka kept walking towards Gonse, but Amaka froze, the form trembling in her fingers. Patience advanced on her, and now there was no fawning sweetness left, only cold fury. "Where did you get that form? Who told you to register that woman? Did I not tell you in front of everybody to stay in your lane?" She snatched at the paper, and Amaka instinctively pulled it back, and that small act of defiance, a trainee refusing to surrender a form, lit Patience's anger into a blaze. "You think because you have a soft heart you can disrespect me on my own floor?" Her voice climbed for the whole hall to hear. "Let me tell you something, small girl. Your training assessment passes through this desk. Your duty roster passes through this desk. One report from me, 1 line in your file, and you will never wear that uniform again. Is one roadside woman who cannot pay worth your entire career? Is she? Answer me." Amaka stood there, the eyes of the hall upon her sister Neka, already kneeling beside Gonse in the background, the threat hanging in the air as real and heavy as a raised hand. And in that suspended moment, the young trainee had to decide with her whole future in the balance whether to drop the form and save herself, or to hold the line for a stranger whose name she did not know was about to shake the entire building to its foundations. Amaka did not drop the form. Her hands were shaking. Her future was hanging by the thread Patience held between two fingers, and still the young trainee lifted her chin and said in a voice that trembled but did not break, "Yes, sister, she is worth it. She is a human being, and she is bleeding, and that is worth my whole career." For one stunned second, Patience had no answer. No one spoke to her that way. But before she could find her fury again, Sister Neneke's voice cut across the hall from the bad end of the room, sharp and frightened, in a way that froze everyone who heard it. "She is hemorrhaging. Patience, come here now. Her pressure is crashing. This baby has minutes, do you hear me, minutes?" The old midwife had her hands on Gonse, and her face had gone the color of ash. Gonse was barely conscious now, her head lolling against the wall, the bench beneath her dark and wet, her lips moving in a whisper no one could hear. The pain had passed beyond crying out. She had folded down into herself the way the body does when it is fighting, only to keep the blood moving to the places that matter. Any nurse with sense, any nurse with a heart would have called the code right then. But Nurse Patience Okiki had spent 9 years building her kingdom on a single principle, and pride would not let her abandon it now, not in front of Mrs. Bianca, not in front of a hall that had just watched a trainee defy her. There is no admission without a deposit. She planted herself in the middle of the floor, arms crossed, and said it loudly so the whole room would know who was in charge. "I have run this ward for 9 years. We do not open theater, we do not waste blood bags and oxygen on people who walk in from the street with empty pockets and a story. If she has money, let her produce it. If she does not—" She spread her hands, and the 4 words came out of her like a verdict, the same 4 words she had spoken 1,000 times to 1,000 desperate faces. No money, no service. A sound went through the hall, low and ugly, a sound of people who had heard those words used on themselves and hated them, but who were too poor and too frightened to do anything but lower their eyes. Mrs. Bianca from her stolen chair gave a satisfied little nod, as if a wise law had been upheld. Sister Neneka rose to her feet, white with rage. "You will answer for this. I am telling you, Patience, you will answer for this woman." "Threaten me again," Patience said. And then, because the bleeding woman and her 2 defenders were now a public embarrassment cluttering her hall, she did the thing that would damn her completely. She turned to the security guard standing by the door, the one who had earlier waved Mr. Sunday back, and she pointed at Gonse. "This one and her people are causing a disturbance. She has no money, she will not leave. She's dripping all over my floor. Remove her. Take her outside to wait for whoever is supposedly coming to pay for her. Go on. Carry her out." The guard hesitated, looking from the dying woman to the senior nurse who outranked him, caught in the oldest trap of the powerless, ordered to do a terrible thing by someone with the authority to make him. He took 1 slow step forward, and that was the moment Amaka stopped being afraid. She did not argue, she did not plead. She turned and she ran. She ran the length of the hall, shoved through the inner doors, and flew down the corridor toward the administrative wing, the registration form still crushed in her fist, her cap falling from her head, her one clear, desperate thought beating in time with her feet. Mr. Okonkwo, the administrator, somebody, anybody with the power to overrule that woman before she kills this mother in front of all of us. She burst into the administrative corridor just as a set of tall doors at the far end swung open, and a stream of men and women in suits came out talking in low voices, files under their arms. The quarterly board meeting had ended. Mr. Okonkwo, the hospital administrator, was among them, and Amaka ran straight at him, breathless, half crying. Sir, please emergency the reception. There is a woman hemorrhaging, and Sister Patience is refusing to admit her. She has ordered security to throw her out. Sir, the baby is dying, please." Mr. Okonkwo's face creased with alarm, and he started toward her, already reaching for the radio at his belt. But it was not Mr. Okonkwo who moved first. A tall man at the center of the departing group, a man with gray at his temples and the quiet authority of someone the whole building had spent 2 weeks fearing, had stopped dead at the trainee's words. He had switched his phone back on the instant the meeting ended the way he always did, and it had buzzed in his hand at that very moment with 3 missed calls and a message from his driver Sunday that he had not yet had time to read. Antepartum hemorrhage. Reception. Refusing to admit. A woman. Dr. Emeka Okafor did not run. He did something more frightening than running. He went very, very still, and his voice when it came was low and even, and cut through the corridor like a blade through cloth. "Where?" he said. "Which woman? Describe her." Amaka, gasping, did not understand why the new director himself had rounded on her, but she answered. "In a blue wrapper, sir, faded plain. Young, about 8-9 months. She came alone. The senior nurse said she has no money, and..." The file dropped from Amika's hand and scattered its pages across the floor, and not one person in that corridor had ever seen the calm new director's face do what it did then. He was already moving, already walking, then striding, then almost running his long coat, snapping behind him the cluster of suited board members, hurrying to keep up without the faintest idea what was happening. And ahead of them, in the crowded reception hall, the security guard's hand had just closed around Gonse Okafor's arm to lift her from the bench when the inner doors at the end of the corridor crashed open, and a sudden, total electric hush fell over the entire room because every member of staff had turned at once toward the sound of those footsteps. And somewhere among the paralyzed crowd, a single terrified whisper passed from mouth to mouth. The director is coming." The doors swung wide, and Dr. Emeka Okafor walked into his own hospital's emergency hall, and the room changed in an instant the way a room changes when a storm walks in. The staff knew him on sight, even though most had only seen the photograph in the lobby. They straightened. They froze. A junior nurse dropped a clipboard. The security guard, whose fingers were still wrapped around Gonse's arm, felt the temperature of the room shift and did not understand why, only that everyone around him had gone rigid with fear. Behind Emeka came the whole board, the suited men and women, and behind them Mr. Okonkwo and the breathless trainee, so that the most powerful figures in Greater Grace Teaching Hospital poured into the waiting hall all at once like water through a broken dam. Nurse Patience felt it before she saw it. She turned from the bench with her practiced smile already forming the smile she kept ready for important visitors, the smile she had given Mrs. Bianca. "Director, sir, welcome. You have caught us at a busy..." She never finished, because Dr. Emeka Okafor was not looking at her. He was not looking at the board, or the staff, or the smartly dressed socialite rising hopefully from her chair. His eyes had gone straight past all of them down the length of the hall, to the bad end by the toilets, to the bench where a woman in a faded blue wrapper sagged gray and bleeding in a security guard's grip, and the calm, feared untouchable new director made a sound that no one in that room would ever forget. Gonse. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was the sound of a man's whole world cracking down the middle, and it carried into every corner of the silent hall. He crossed the floor in long, terrible strides, shoving a chair out of his path so hard it skidded across the tiles, and he reached her, and he tore the guard's hand off her arm and gathered her against him, and the unmovable director of Greater Grace went down on his knees on the dirty, wet floor with his pregnant wife in his arms. "Gonse, Gonse, I am here. Look at me. I am here, my love, open your eyes." Her lashes fluttered. She knew his voice the way a drowning person knows the surface. "Emeka," she breathed. "I called you. I kept calling. They would not look at me. They said I had no money. They moved me to the corner. I know." His voice broke on the words. "I know. I am here now. Nobody will touch you again." The hush in the hall had become something physical, of pressure on the skin. And into that hush the truth began to spread, not from the director, who had eyes for no one but his wife, but in horrified whispers that ran from staff member to staff member like fire along a fuse. That is his wife. The woman they turned away is the director's wife. The one patients dragged to the corner, the one with no money, that is Madame Okafor. Sister Nneka understood first, and her hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Okonkwo understood and went pale. The young trainee, Amaka, standing in the doorway with the crumpled registration form still in her fist, the form on which she had written Gonse Okafor without ever knowing what it meant, felt the floor seem to move beneath her because the name on her paper was the name above the gate. And Nurse Patience Okiki understood last of all, which was the cruelest mercy of the day, because she had a few seconds longer than anyone to believe it might not be true. She stood in the middle of the hall she had ruled for 9 years, her ready smile collapsing inch by inch off her face, watching the most powerful man in the hospital kneel, weeping on the floor, over the very woman she had mocked, refused, dragged to the corner, and ordered thrown into the street. Her lips moved. No sound came out. Her hand reached for the edge of the counter, the throne of her little kingdom, and missed it. Emeka was already barking orders without raising his arms still around his wife, and now the calm was gone, and the surgeon had taken over fast and absolute. Stretcher now. Theater 2 alert them possible abruption prep for emergency section. Crossmatch 4 units. Where's the duty obstetrician? Get him on the floor in 60 seconds. Sister Nneka was already running the staff, exploding into the motion they should have shown an hour ago, and a stretcher appeared as if by magic, the very speed of it proving how easily it could have come before. As they lifted Gonse onto it, she caught the front of his coat with weak fingers. Emeka. There was a girl, a young nurse. She was the only one. She gave me water. She held me. She ran to find help. Promise me. Her eyes searched the crowd and found Amaka frozen by the door, and a faint, exhausted smile touched her lips. That one. She is the reason I am still breathing. Promise me you will remember her. I promise, he said. I promise. Now save your strength. They wheeled her away through the inner doors at a run. Sister Nneka and the duty team around her, and the hall she left behind was a different place than the one she had entered. The metal chairs were the same. The silent television still flickered its church service on the wall. But the air had changed forever because every poor and tired and overlooked person in that room had just watched the unthinkable, had watched the woman with no clean wrapper turn out to be the wife of the king, and they were all of them thinking the same thing. And some of them, the bravest, were beginning to murmur it aloud while they looked at the senior nurse standing alone and trembling in the center of the floor. Dr. Emeka Okafor rose slowly to his feet. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his wife's blood from his hands one finger at a time without hurry, and the deliberateness of it was more terrifying than any shout. The board stood silent behind him. Mr. Okonkwo stood silent. The whole hall held its breath. And then the director lifted his head, and his eyes no longer wet now, but cold and clear and absolutely without mercy, traveled across the room and came to rest at last on Nurse Patience Okiki. You, Dr. Emeka Okafor said. He did not raise his voice. He walked toward Nurse Patience, slowly folding the blood-stained handkerchief as he came, and every step rang in the silent hall. You looked at a bleeding woman 8 months with a child, and you decided she was not worth your time. You moved her to a bench by the toilet to make room for someone you thought could pay. You ordered a guard to drag her into the street. He stopped an arm's length from her. Tell me her name. The woman you turned away, tell me her name. Patience's mouth opened and closed. Sir, I did not know. Her name. I did not know who she was, sir. I swear it if I had known she was your wife. That, he said. And now the cold cracked and something dangerous showed beneath it. Is the worst thing you could have said. You did not refuse her because of who she is. You refused her because of who you thought she was. A poor woman. A woman with nothing. and you decided a woman with nothing could bleed to death on your floor. He turned to the room. How many of you has she said it to those 4 words? No money, no service. How many? For a moment, no one moved. Then the old farmer with the bandaged hand stood up slowly from his chair. "Mioga," he said. 3 hours I am sitting. She said it to me. A young mother rose her toddler on her hip. She told me, come back when I have 5,000. My pekin has fever since morning. One by one around the hall the overlooked got to their feet. A laborer holding his ribs, a widow, a boy who had brought his sick grandmother. 9 years of swallowed humiliation found its voice all at once, and the murmur became a tide, and Nurse Patience Okiki turned in a slow circle in the middle of the floor. She had ruled, and saw nothing but the faces of the people she had stepped on rising up to face her. Mr. Okonkwo. Emeka did not take his eyes off her. The cameras. This hall and the corridor and the entrance. I want everything from this morning pulled and preserved before anyone touches it. I also want the admission deposit records for this desk going back as far as they exist. And I want a written statement from every member of staff who was on this floor today, beginning with the trainee at the door. Right away, sir. The administrator was already on his radio. It was at this moment that Mrs. Bianca, who had been sitting very still and very small in her stolen chair, decided it was time to be elsewhere. She gathered her great lace gown and her designer bag and rose, edging toward the doors with the careful steps of someone trying not to be noticed. "Madam." Emeka's voice caught her like a hook. "You are leaving. You came here to be treated. Sit. You will give a statement like everyone else. You were here. You saw. I have somewhere to be." Bianca's grand voice had thinned considerably. She insulted the woman, called the young mother emboldened now. She called her a roadside woman. She said she belonged in the gutter. She was laughing with the nurse. "That is a lie," Bianca began. But Mr. Okonkwo had returned to Emeka's side with a tablet and a strange expression, and he leaned in to murmur something. The director's eyebrow rose. "It seems," Emeka said, turning back to Bianca with the faintest, coldest curiosity, "that the front desk has a record of you, madam. 3 visits this year. Each time you announced yourself demanded the best treatment, and each time the deposit check you wrote was returned by the bank. Unpaid. You owe this hospital more than you have ever spent in it." The grand Madam Bianca of Lagos. He let the silence stretch. "You are not a quality client. You are a debtor in expensive lace who looked down on a woman worth 100 of you, and the only difference between you and the patient you mocked is that her wrapper was honest about what she had, and your gown was a lie." The lace seemed to deflate around her. The handbag, everyone could now see, had a strap repaired with thread. The whole magnificent performance crumbled in front of the hall that had been so cowed by it 10 minutes before, and Mrs. Bianca sank back into the chair she had stolen this time with no one to plump the cushion, while the people she had sneered at watched her fall with quiet, grim satisfaction. Emeka turned back to Patience, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle, which was the most frightening thing of all. "Nurse Okiki, as of this moment, you are suspended from all duties pending a full disciplinary inquiry by the board, which, as it happens, is standing right behind me. Your access is revoked. Your ward is no longer your ward. You will surrender your keys and your tag to Mr. Okonkwo before you leave this building, and you will not enter it again until you are summoned to answer for 9 years of what these people have just described." He paused. "I want to be very clear. This is not because she is my wife. If she'd been a market woman, a beggar, a stranger off the road, every word I have spoken would be exactly the same. That is the part you never understood. That is the part that ends your career today." Patience's keys slipped from her shaking fingers and clattered onto the tiles. She did not pick them up. She stood there, stripped of her kingdom in front of her subjects, her mouth working, no words coming while the hall watched in a silence that was its own kind of verdict. And then the inner doors burst open, and a junior nurse came out running, eyes wide, searching the hall, and when she found the director, she did not bother to lower her voice, and what she shouted turned every other thing in that room to ash in an instant. "Director, Sir Theater 2, sir, come quickly, they need you. Madam's pressure has dropped again, and the baby's heartbeat, sir, the heartbeat is failing. They said come now. They said there is no time." Dr. Emeka Okafor ran, whatever else he was. Director husband, the man who had just dismantled a nurse in front of 100 people in the seconds it took to reach Theater 2, he became only one thing again, a surgeon whose hands had saved more lives than he could count. He scrubbed in at the door, snapped on gloves, and the moment he crossed into the bright, cold room, the team made space for him, because there was no one in that building more able to do what had to be done. Gonse lay on the table behind the blue drape, pale as paper, her blood pressure a falling number that the anesthetist kept calling out in a voice growing tighter each time. The duty obstetrician looked up with relief and fear in equal measure. "Placental abruption, sir, significant. She has lost a lot of blood. Fetal heart rate is down to 70 and dropping. We have to deliver now or we lose them both. Then we deliver now." Emeka took his place. "2 units running, get the 3rd ready. Suction. Sister Nneka, you are with me." His eyes found one more figure at the edge of the room, the young trainee who had refused to leave, standing against the wall with her hands clasped and her whole heart in her face. Amaka. You found her on that floor, and you did not let go. You will not start running away from her now. Gloves. Get over here and assist. Watch, learn, and hand me what I ask for. It was unheard of, a trainee at a table like this one, but no one argued with the director, and Amaka came forward on legs that barely held her gloved up with shaking hands that steadied the instant they had work to do, and took her place across from the man whose wife she had carried. What followed the audience does not need every red detail of only this. For 4 long minutes the room held its breath and worked. The anesthetist's numbers wavered at the edge of the cliff. Sister Nneka pressed and counted. Emeka's hands moved with a speed and certainty that came from 20 years of standing exactly here in exactly this kind of darkness. And Amaka watched and reached and handed and held, learning more in those 4 minutes than in all her months of carrying files. And she prayed without moving her lips the same prayer she had prayed for a brother who did not live. And then there was a sound. Small, furious outrage, the cry of a newborn who has been pulled too soon from the only world he knew and intends to make his feelings known about it. The boy. The boy they had already named between themselves. He came into the cold, bright room, screaming red and alive and whole, and the whole theater seemed to exhale at once, and Sister Nneka let out a laugh that was half a sob as she lifted him. "He is breathing, sir. He is breathing well. Apgar is good." She wrapped him fast and warm. "He is small, but he is fighting. Listen to him fight." For 1 suspended second, Doctor, Emeka Okafor's hands stilled, and over his mask his eyes closed just for that second before he opened them and went back to work, because his wife was not safe yet. The bleeding still had to be stopped, the numbers still had to climb back from the cliff. But the worst of it had turned. With the baby out, the source of the hemorrhage could be controlled, and minute by minute, unit by unit, the anesthetist's voice loosened, and the falling numbers stopped falling and steadied and began slowly to rise. "Pressure is coming up, sir. She is holding. It was Amaka, when the most dangerous part was done, who was sent to carry the swaddled, squalling baby to the warmer at the side of the room, and she cradled him against her chest as she crossed those few steps. This child she had fought a senior nurse and risked her whole career to save before she ever knew his mother was anyone at all. And the tears she had held back since the waiting hall finally came sliding silently down over her mask, while the baby gripped her finger with one tiny fist. An hour later, in the recovery room, Gonse opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Emeka, his mask gone, his eyes rimmed red, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand in both of his. The second thing she saw in his other arm, swaddled and sleeping now exhausted from his own arrival, was their son. "He is here," Emeka said softly. "He is small, and he is perfect, and he is here, and so are you. You are both here." His voice failed him. "I almost lost you both in my own hospital. In my own hospital, Gonse." "But I am here," she whispered. She lifted one weak hand and touched the baby's cheek. Then her eyes moved past her husband, searching the room, and found the young nurse standing quietly by the door, trying to make herself invisible, not sure if a trainee belonged in this private moment at all. "Amaka." Gonse's voice was thin, but it carried. "Come here. Come close." And when the young woman came hesitant to the side of the bed, Gonse took her hand the way Amaka had taken hers on that dirty floor. "You did not know my name. You did not know my husband. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and you held me anyway. Everybody in that hall looked at my clothes. You looked at me." Tears stood in her eyes. "A person's worth is not stitched into their clothes. My mother used to say that. Today, you proved her right when nobody else would. I will not forget you. As long as I live, I will not forget you." Amaka could not speak. She only held the hand of the woman she had refused to abandon and wept, and the three of them, the surgeon, his wife, and the trainee who had saved them both, stayed there together in the quiet while the baby slept. But down in the administrative wing of Greater Grace Teaching Hospital, the day was not finished. The board had assembled. The camera footage had been pulled. The deposit records lay open on the table. And Nurse Patience Okeke, stripped of her keys and her tag, was being led toward that room to answer for 9 years at last, already rehearsing in her desperate mind the lies and the tears she would use to save herself. The boardroom of Greater Grace Teaching Hospital was a long, cool, paneled room, and Nurse Patience Okeke had never once in 9 years been invited inside it. She entered it now not as a guest, but as the accused, and the great screen at the end of the table was already showing in silent, undeniable color the footage from the waiting hall. There she was turning away from a bleeding woman. There she was dragging that woman from her chair to seat Mrs. Bianca. There she was pointing the security guard toward the half-conscious mother and ordering her carried into the street. The camera had no opinion and told no lies. It simply played and played while the board watched, and Patience's prepared tears dried in her throat because there was nothing left to cry about. You cannot beg your way out of a thing the whole world can see. The deposit records told the rest. Mr. Okonkwo laid them out plainly, 9 years of numbers that did not add up, fees that grew for the poor and shrank for those who slipped folded notes across the counter, admissions that appeared for a handshake and vanished for a farmer. 2 former staff members, no longer afraid now that her kingdom had fallen, gave statements about the bribes they had watched her take. By the time the board's chairman spoke, the verdict had long since written itself. Patience was dismissed for gross misconduct, effective immediately. Her nursing license was referred to the National Council for review, and given the footage, given the records, given a hall full of witnesses, everyone in the room understood she would likely never wear the uniform again. She walked out of Greater Grace for the last time through the same waiting hall she had ruled, and the people sitting in the metal chairs, the poor and the tired and the overlooked, watched her go in a silence heavier than any insult, and not one of them rose to plump her cushion. Mrs. Bianca's reckoning was quieter, but no less complete. The hospital placed her on its debtors list. Her unpaid checks were sent for collection, and the story of the Grand Lagos socialite who turned out to be a fraud in repaired lace traveled through the city the way such stories do by market, and by phone and by church pew until the doors that had once opened to her name began one by one to close. But the law of this world is not only that cruelty is exposed, it is also that kindness, the kind that costs you something, the kind nobody is watching, comes back around in ways you could never arrange for yourself. 3 weeks later, Amaka was called to the director's office, certain she had done something wrong. She found Dr. Emeka Okafor behind his desk and Gonse beside him, pale still, but standing the baby asleep in a wrap across her chest. On the desk lay an envelope. "You assisted at the most important surgery of my life," Emeka said, "with steadier hands than men twice your training. So this is not a gift, and it is not charity because you would refuse charity. I can see that in you. It is what you have earned." Inside the envelope was a full scholarship, every fee paid to complete her nursing degree, and her midwifery specialization at the best school in the country. "And when you qualify," he added, "there is a post waiting for you here. Greater Grace is going to need nurses who run toward the people everyone else runs from. We are rebuilding this place around that idea. I would like you to help lead it." Amaka wept for the 3rd time in a month, and this time there was no fear anywhere in it. The idea Emeka spoke of became real. Gonse, once she had recovered, did not let the matter rest as a private grief turned to private joy. She had lain bleeding on a bench by a toilet because she looked poor, and she could not stop thinking about all the women without a husband whose name was on the gate, the ones who really were poor, who were turned away every single day with no director to come striding through the doors. So she founded, with Emeka's full backing, a program at Greater Grace that bore a single stubborn rule painted on the wall of the very hall where she had been refused. No patient in an emergency would ever again be turned away for lack of a deposit. Care first, money after. A fund covered those who could not pay. They called it simply the rule her mother had taught her that a person's worth is not stitched into their clothes. The day they unveiled it, the waiting hall was full, and Sister Nneka was made the new senior matron of the emergency ward, and the metal chairs were the same, and the silent television still flickered on the wall, but the woman behind the counter now greeted the farmer and the laborer and the frightened young mother with the same warmth she would have given a king. Months passed. The rainy season came and went, and on a bright Sunday morning the green streets of GRA filled with cars for a naming ceremony, the proper one. The one with jollof rice steaming in great pots and aunties in matching ankara, and a baby boy, fat-cheeked and healthy, now passed from arm to loving arm. Gonse held her son on the veranda and watched her guests, and among them, in a brand-new nurse's uniform she had every right to wear, laughing with Sister Nneka over a plate of food, stood Amaka. Gonse caught her eye across the crowded compound, and the two women smiled at each other, the smile of people bound by something the world could not break, the smile of a floor where one had held the other when holding cost everything. The baby gurgled and grabbed a fistful of his mother's collar. The sun came down warm over all of them, and somewhere across the city a woman in faded, fraying lace and another in no uniform at all were learning, each in her own bitter way, the same lesson the whole story had been moving toward from the very first cruel word in that waiting hall.